Welcome back to our video series on the book Adult Spiritual Development, the Primitive Ego Journey to an Adult Consciousness. Today we're going to be taking a look at Chapter 6, and I'm hoping that you're beginning to see how a lot of the material from each of these chapters is beginning to intertwine. I'll try to illustrate that as best I can as I go through the book, but as you read the book, you'll see the interconnections a lot more clearly, I suspect. At any rate, Chapter 6 is Becoming and Co-Creation. And I always put becoming in parentheses. The spirit of the Creator, first big point, key concept, is the evolutionary impulse to become. That's the impulse that's incarnate in every single aspect of creation in this universe. The ground of creation is based on change. Without change, creation wouldn't happen, okay? So the evolutionary impulse to become has some commonalities. One is the increasing complexity. Two, there's an increasing diversity in the universe. And matter and energy eventually became life, and then even conscious life. And then life, human life, consciousness that was conscious of being conscious. Okay? So the spirit of the Creator is the evolutionary impulse to become. Now, the second big point in this chapter is that the universe is a single field of energy. It's one unity. The human mind loves to break things up into this and that, right and wrong, good or bad, up or down, hot or cold, in or out. And we do this because that's how the human mind begins to kind of separate this stuff out so we can look at these contrasts and these differences. But it's extremely important to remember that all these differences are all created in the mind. If we look at the universe, it's one unity. It's one gigantic field of energy. This marker that I'm holding looks like a marker, does things that a marker does, it'll write on the board. But basically what this is, just energy. It's about 99.7 places, 99999, empty space, okay? It's just energy that I happen to be holding in my hand. My brain tells me, oh, I can't make sense of that, so I'll call it a marker, okay? A dry board marker. Now we're all happy, right? But what we really aren't looking at is if we stop breaking the world into bits and pieces and parts and begin to see it as a unity, then what we recognize is that everything is sacred. There is nothing in the universe that's separate. So when we start to create things that are sacred and things that aren't sacred, that's a human illusion, okay? It has nothing to do with creation. Everything in our universe is sacred because it's only one. Okay, next big point. Onic theory. Big word, simple concept. Remember the Russian dolls where one doll would fit inside another doll, which would fit inside another doll, and so on? That's what our universe is. It's a huge unity, and everything fits into that unity. And we know this best if we look at the human body. The human body has something like 100 trillion cells. Every cell in our human body takes care of our body, and our body takes care of all the cells, right? So we start with the first, we have 100 trillion little cells, and even inside each cell is another smaller system, okay? In other words, I guess what I'm trying to say is the outer membrane of our cell, inside it, that's a holon, okay? And inside are other little bits and pieces, bacterium and DNA and all the rest of it. And then if you go a little bit bigger, we find out that some of those cells are in heart. That's a holon that's all by itself. Some of them are over here in another holon called liver. And some of them are in lungs. And some of them are in our fingers. Some are in our feet. All of those bits and pieces, however, are all inside the human body. And the human body is in another holon. It's called human civilization, human culture. And in human cultures, there are a lot of them, and all of a sudden we have a global civilization. Now, what we're looking at is each one of those is a separate entity in itself, made up of other little holons. And that's what this universe is. So when we try to break things into this and that, we always need to be remembering that everything is intertwined with everything else. Nothing in this universe stands alone. Now, why am I focusing on this in the book? Because our primitive ego loves to believe that we're separate from all of this stuff. We're a unique me, a self, okay? And everything else is out there, right? That's how we think. That's how our brain structures it. And our primitive ego, here comes a bent nickel belief now, our primitive ego believes that we really are a separate self, that we have really nothing to do with the rest of the universe. But the minute you understand holonic theory, then you recognize there is no such thing as separate. Everything is intertwined and dependent on something else, and that includes us. So, if we want to become more self-aware and we want to move into an evolved consciousness, a more adult, mature consciousness, then we have to recognize some of these basic concepts because our primitive ego won't. So if we want to see our primitive ego, then we start by understanding what reality really is and then checking out how we believe, how our primitive ego believes. Okay, next thing, duality is an illusion, but it's based on us versus them, right? So the illusion of the human mind is based on duality. It's us as separate individuals versus all them, those other individuals. And of course, now going back to previous chapters, if there are other people out there, then wait a minute, if my primitive ego is right, so if I'm right, then them, they must be wrong, right? So what we do is we turn everything into us versus an enemy. In the last century, humans killed 100 million other humans. And the key word there is other. So when you begin to recognize that really our universe doesn't have anything called duality or this and that, it's all unity, and that the human species is part of this whole Onic, and yet our mind, working out of the primitive ego, is killing 100 million people last century, and we're well on our way to that number in this century. So this stuff is pretty important, and what I'm trying to point out in the book is that probably one of the most important things that the human species has to do, and that means you and I, is we have to evolve our thinking. We have to mature our consciousness and start thinking much more grounded in reality. Okay, last point. This is a big one. We are co-creators. We are conscious, little local pieces of consciousness, a little I am, and an ocean of I am, right? So what it means is that the Creator used energy to form helium and hydrogen and turn helium and hydrogen into matter and life. We do the same thing. We use consciousness. In other words, the Creator had to first think about this, right? And then this is what came out of it. Now, what is the Creator? Who knows? That's a mystery. But we do know the spirit of the Creator is the impulse to become, to change, to evolve, to grow in complexity and diversity. We are creators of form also. We think of a bridge, we build one. We think of a building, we build it. We think about relationships and we build them. And we build them either out of a mature consciousness or we build them out of our primitive ego. And depending on which we're going to build that relationship out of, it's going to depend on whether or not there's positive energy in that relationship or negative energy. If we're in our primitive ego, we're probably going to build relationships that have a lot of negative energy in them. So this stuff is not just philosophy. It's not just a different way of looking at the world. It's very, very, very basic. We create relationships. Just like we create forms. We use our consciousness, just like the Creator. So we are, whether we like it or not, we are co-creators with the spirit of the evolutionary impulse to become, the spirit of the Creator. So the question that we have to leave this chapter with is, what do you want to create? And what part of you are you going to use? The primitive ego? Or are you going to use a more matured, adult, evolved consciousness? And of course, what the Course here is about is to try to get us to grow in self-awareness until we become that adult consciousness. And it's very important because we are creating this world and these relationships, and we're killing off an awful lot of people based on our primitive ego thinking. Okay? Co-creators, duality is an illusion. Holonic theory, nothing stands alone. Everything is integrated and interdependent and every single thing else in the universe. The universe is one unity, one basic field of energy. The spirit of the Creator, the ground of creation, is change. And the spirit of that Creator is the impulse to become. All right? This is a heavy chapter, but it's really important in terms of where we're going to go in the next sessions in this video series. So if you get your head around this a little bit, we'll be back and take a look at it in a little different perspective further on in the book. Okay? At any rate, have a good week. We'll see you down the road.